On any given night in 2020, 580,000 people were experiencing homelessness in America. It seems baffling that a country that likes to present itself as one of the greatest in the world, with the greatest resources and the greatest opportunities, would have such a glaring blind spot. Homelessness in America is an ongoing and growing humanitarian crisis. I grew up in New York City, the city with the second highest homeless population in the country. New York City is a notoriously expensive city, and rising housing prices and stagnant wages makes New York City hard for many New Yorkers. This is, of course, not just a New York City problem, or even a city problem for that matter. Across the country, both urban and rural people experience homelessness. Homelessness is the interaction of individual and economic circumstances. On one hand, victims of domestic violence, people with marginalized genders and sexualities, those with chronic physical or mental disabilities, and those with substance abuse disorders are highly susceptible to homelessness. On the other hand, rising housing prices, lack of affordable housing, stagnant wages, and increasing income inequality leaves many people vulnerable to slipping into homelessness. To solve for homelessness, we have to address the situations that lead to homelessness, as well as provide relief and ladders out for those currently experiencing homelessness. So what's currently being done? In two words, not enough. Some of the policy answers that we currently have are great. Emergency rental assistance, subsidized housing vouchers, affordable housing, and public housing are all important ways to keep people from sliding into homelessness. Permanent supportive housing, a system that gets people with disabilities and substance abuse disorders into homes, matching them with caseworkers to get them access to the care and resources that they need to stay housed, gets people experiencing homelessness out of emergency shelters and off of the streets and into homes. The problem, however, is that these are highly limited, small in scale, and often difficult to access. People can find themselves navigating difficult bureaucracy and decades-long wait lists just to get housing. For those already experiencing homelessness, the options are often limited just to emergency shelters, if that. Funding is, as always, an issue. Limited federal funding trickles down to state and municipal governments, and many of the resources are funded in part or primarily via charitable donations. While some of the solutions we talked about are pretty okay, other policy answers that we currently have are far less great. While homelessness itself is not a crime, many of the life-maintaining actions that homeless people engage in can be. Loitering, panhandling, sleeping in cars or on park or subway benches are actions that are criminalized in many states. These often lead to interactions with law enforcement that can be violent and often put people in the system, giving them a criminal record and making it difficult to access some of the resources that may be technically available to them. These answers to homelessness do not adequately address the root causes of homelessness, which of course are lack of affordable housing and insufficient income. So to tackle homelessness and address all these concerns, we're looking at four main things: supportive policies, addressing income inequality, increased funding, and new bills and legislation. For supportive policies, we're talking universal health care, universal basic income, and decriminalizing homelessness. Making sure that everyone has access to healthcare means people have access to mental health care, as well as substance abuse treatment. Universal basic income will give people wiggle room when it comes to their budgets and paying for necessities, which could make a significant difference for people not having to decide between making rent and eating dinner. Decriminalizing homelessness is also important in keeping people out of the system, saving governments thousands of dollars in unnecessary arrests, and making sure that people are not disqualified from resources based off of their criminal record. These policies, while not addressing homelessness head on, foment a society that is better equipped to keep people from falling into homelessness, whether from individual circumstances or economic ones. To address income inequality, we have to raise the federal minimum wage to $25 an hour. We know productivity has outstripped wages for decades now, and housing prices have also outstripped wages for years. And we know that increased income inequality is correlated with increased homelessness. It's not a coincidence that major cities like LA and New York City have such high rates of homelessness. We also know that there is not a single US state where a person working full-time on minimum wage can afford a 1 or 2 bedroom apartment. This makes no sense. We need higher wages for people. So higher wages means people have more money to put towards housing and other costs, which means people are less likely to slide into homelessness. In addition, having job training programs can prepare people for the workforce and the job search process so people can get a wide range of jobs. The third thing we need to focus on is increased funding. It's quintessential. The biggest problem that we talked about is that safety nets and resources don't have enough money for the amount of people that need. There isn't enough affordable housing and there isn't enough public housing, so we need funding so that we can build more, and funding to maintain the buildings that we do have. Rural communities are criminally underserved because the funding is nearly non-existent. We need expansions in these programs and the people power to make navigating these systems and resources clearer for those who need them. The last bit is current legislation. Knowing about the problem is only the first step. We now know the problem, we now know the solutions, but for the solutions to be implemented, they need to be passed in Congress. A few bills on the legislative floor, namely the Choice and Affordable Housing Act of 2021, the Help and Abusive Living Situations Act, the HEAL Act, Affordable Home Act, Housing is a Human Right Act of 2021, and Ending Homelessness Act are working to address these problems. They need to get passed. For those of us not in Congress, we need to contact our legislators to make it clear that this humanitarian crisis cannot go on any longer, and that they have the tools and the means to stop it. I know what it's like to have to sleep in a car with no heat every night on some of the coldest nights of the year in New York City. I wouldn't wish it on anyone. But beyond my experience and beyond New York, many of us can feel that vulnerable people should be protected, whether these are veterans, children, those with disabilities, or young workers just trying to make ends meet. We want the best for each other. Beyond America, there are countries with comparable or less resources and opportunity than America does without this problem. If we can recognize humanitarian crises around the world and intervene, it seems that this growing everyday crisis of homelessness at home should also be acknowledged and intervened in. Thank you.